Abina was the type of girl everyone noticed, not for being loud, but because she was always at the top of her class. Her dream of becoming a doctor wasn't just a goal, it was her entire world. One lazy afternoon, she stumbled across a dusty old diary tucked behind some forgotten books in the school library. It was plain, worn out, and had no name on it. She wasn't usually nosy, but something about it called to her. Opening it, she found messy handwriting filling the first page, hurried, almost desperate. The words hit her hard. The writer spoke of heartbreak, bullying, and a constant feeling of being unseen. It wasn't poetry or stories, it was real, raw emotion. Abina quickly shut the diary, her heart racing. It felt personal, like she'd stepped into someone's mind without permission. Abina couldn't stop thinking about the diary. The pain in those words felt so familiar, yet so hidden. She decided to read a bit more. Each entry painted a picture of someone struggling, someone close. The diary mentioned Mr. Danso, a teacher infamous for calling on students when they weren't paying attention. That narrowed it down. She knew Mr. Danso's class was where most students hid behind their books, hoping to go unnoticed. Another entry talked about avoiding sports practice. The writer hated being there, but it seemed important to someone else in their life. Abina realized this wasn't just anyone. It had to be someone from her school, someone she might have crossed paths with daily. A part of her wanted to know more. Another part feared what she'd find. The next morning, Abina couldn't focus in class. Her mind kept drifting back to the diary. Who wrote it? Was it someone in this very classroom? The next few pages revealed a writer suffocated by expectations. They mentioned parents who demanded perfect grades and teachers who only saw them as another face in the crowd. Abina frowned. She knew that pressure well. Her parents were always reminding her that failure wasn't an option. But this felt different. It wasn't just pressure, it was despair. The writer had scribbled one line over and over, "When will I ever be enough?" That single sentence stuck with her. She couldn't imagine feeling so lost, yet the words felt hauntingly familiar. As Abina flipped through more pages, she searched for a name. But the writer never signed anything. Instead, there were tiny hints, things like science group meeting and lunch by the mango tree. These details made her think of her classmates, but no one stood out. Then she noticed something faint in the margin of one page, to K. It wasn't much, but it was the first clue that the diary wasn't just an emotional outlet. It was a letter to someone. Who was K? A friend? A crush? The questions made her stomach twist, but she couldn't stop reading. During lunch, Abina sat under the big mango tree, pretending to study. Her eyes scanned the students around her. Could one of them be the writer? She noticed Kwame sitting with his group of friends. He seemed relaxed, laughing loudly at a joke. But could he be hiding something? Then there was Amma, who always sat alone, picking at her food. Abina couldn't tell if she was shy or if she just didn't want to be bothered. For the first time, Abina realized how little she actually knew about her classmates. Everyone had their own world, their own secrets. The next entry in the diary was different. It wasn't about school or pressure, it was about love. The writer described feeling invisible to someone they cared about deeply. They wrote about watching K smile at someone else and feeling like their heart had shattered. Abina felt a lump in her throat. She'd never been in love, but she understood the ache of wanting something you couldn't have. It was clear this wasn't just a crush. The writer's words were filled with longing, like they believed love was the only thing that could save them. Abina kept reading. Each page revealed more about the writer's struggles. One entry stood out. It talked about a betrayal, a friend who turned on them when they needed support the most. The writer didn't name the friend, but the pain was obvious. They felt abandoned, like no one was truly on their side. Abina felt anger bubble inside her. How could someone do that to a friend? But then she wondered, had she ever done something like that without realizing it? The more Abina read, the more she felt connected to the writer. Their struggles felt personal, like she was carrying their pain alongside them. But she couldn't just keep this to herself. She needed answers. She needed to find the person who wrote this. She decided to start with small questions. She'd casually ask her classmates about Kay and see if anyone slipped up. For now, though, she closed the diary and tucked it safely into her bag. This wasn't just a mystery anymore, it was her mission. The next day, Abina scanned the cafeteria as she walked to her usual table. Her eyes caught something odd, a group of boys laughing and pointing at a piece of paper. Curiosity got the better of her, and she edged closer. One of them was reading aloud, mocking the words as the others cackled. Her stomach dropped. It was a page from the diary. Abina clenched her fists. Someone must have found it before her and shared it. The thought of the writer's pain being turned into a joke made her furious. Without thinking, Abina marched over to the group. "What's so funny?" she asked, her voice sharper than she expected. One of the boys, yawning lazily, held up the page. "Just some emo nonsense we found lying around. Probably some loser's journal." Abina snatched the paper from his hand, her glare daring them to say more. "It's not yours. Stop being jerks." They rolled their eyes and walked away, but Abina didn't care. She carefully folded the page and slipped it into her pocket. Whoever wrote the diary deserved better than this. That night, Abina unfolded the crumpled diary page she'd rescued. It was a short entry, talking about the writer's fear of being mocked if anyone found out their secrets. Her chest tightened. It was as if they'd predicted this exact moment. Abina made a silent promise to protect the diary, and whoever wrote it. She didn't know who they were yet, but she felt a responsibility to shield their story from people who wouldn't understand. If the writer was too scared to share their voice, then maybe Abina could be their voice. The next morning, Abina started asking subtle questions about her classmates. She brought up names casually, like she was just chatting. "So, who usually hangs out with Kwame after school?" she asked one girl during science. The girl shrugged. "Probably Amma or Kofi." "Why?" Abina played it cool, but inside, her brain was racing. Could one of them be K? She mentally listed every name in her class that started with K. There weren't many, but it didn't make her search any easier. After school, Abina overheard two classmates talking near the library. Their voices were hushed, but the words were sharp. "She's always crying in the bathroom." "It's so annoying," one of them whispered. "Yeah, but what do you expect? Everyone knows she can't handle anything," the other replied with a snicker. Abina's ears perked up. She didn't catch a name, but she had a feeling this might be connected to the diary. Whoever they were talking about seemed like they carried the same weight as the writer. The next day, Abina hung around the school bathrooms after lunch, hoping to catch a clue. She felt ridiculous, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the right track. Sure enough, she heard someone sobbing quietly in the farthest stall. "Hey," Abina called softly, knocking gently on the door. "Are you okay?" The crying stopped immediately, followed by silence. Whoever was inside didn't want to talk, and Abina decided not to push. She walked away, her curiosity burning stronger than ever. The diary mentioned sports practice a few times, specifically how the writer dreaded being there. Abina decided to visit the field after school to see if anything stood out. From the bleachers, she watched the soccer team warming up. Most of the players looked confident, joking around with each other. But one person caught her attention, a girl standing off to the side, fiddling with her shoelaces and avoiding eye contact. She looked nervous, out of place. Abina made a mental note to find out her name. Later that evening, Abina checked the diary again. She noticed a loose page tucked between two entries, something she hadn't seen before. This page wasn't like the others. It was a poem, scribbled hastily. In the shadows, I find myself. Where no one sees and no one asks. But how I wish for just one glance. To know I'm more than just a mask. The words felt so heavy, yet so hopeful. Whoever wrote this wasn't just hiding, they were begging to be found. During lunch, Abina decided to sit with Amma, the quiet girl who always ate alone. Amma seemed surprised but didn't protest. You're really good at math, Abina said, trying to break the ice. Amma shrugged. It's just numbers. They make more sense than people. Abina smiled, but her mind was working overtime. Amma's loneliness reminded her of the diary's writer. Could she be the one? Later that day, Abina overheard one of the boys from the cafeteria bragging about pranking someone by switching their locker contents. You're awful, she blurted out, unable to hold back. The boy smirked. Relax. It's just a joke. Abina's fists clenched. What if it's not funny to them? What if it's the thing that breaks them? He rolled his eyes and walked away, but Abina felt a surge of determination. The more she learned, the more she realized how much the writer had been through. Another diary entry mentioned Kay sitting by the mango tree every afternoon. That detail stood out to Abina, it was so specific. The next day, she made a point to pass by the tree after school. Sure enough, Kwame was there, alone this time. Hey, Kwame, she called. Do you usually sit here? He looked confused but nodded. Yeah, why? No reason, she said quickly, but her suspicions grew. While talking to Kwame's friend, Kofi, Abina brought up the diary without mentioning specifics. Do you think anyone in our class is dealing with stuff? Like, personal struggles? Kofi frowned. I mean, maybe Amma. She's been acting weird lately. But if it's anyone, it's probably Kwame. He's got this whole tough guy thing, but I've seen him lose it after practice. Abina's eyes widened. Kwame? Could he be the writer? The next day, Abina tried to talk to Kwame again. She wanted to ask him directly, but how could she without giving too much away? So, how's practice going? She asked, keeping her tone light. Kwame shrugged. Same as always. Coach is on my case, but that's nothing new. There was something off in his voice, though. It wasn't frustration, it sounded more like exhaustion. Abina wondered if he was hiding more than he let on. After math class, Abina walked out with Amma, hoping to learn more. You ever sit by the mango tree after school? Abina asked casually. Amma stopped in her tracks. Why do you care? Her tone was defensive, almost fearful. Abina felt her chest tighten. I just noticed a few people hang out there. That's all. Amma didn't say anything else, but her reaction left Abina with more questions than answers. That evening, Abina flipped through the diary again. She noticed a page that had been torn out cleanly, leaving only jagged edges behind. Her heart sank. What could have been so painful that the writer didn't want to leave it behind? The entry before the missing page hinted at something big. It talked about the final straw and feeling like there was no way out. Abina felt a chill run through her. Abina decided to speak to Kwame's soccer coach the next day. She pretended she was writing a school article about team sports. "Kwame seems like one of your best players," she said. "How's he doing?" The coach sighed. "He's talented, but his focus has been off lately. I think he's dealing with stuff outside the field. Kids like him, they carry a lot on their shoulders." Abina nodded, trying to hide her growing concern. That night, Abina stayed up reading the diary under her blanket. One entry stood out. It was written in shaky handwriting, as if the writer had been crying. They wrote about feeling trapped, like they couldn't escape the expectations of everyone around them. The only person who seemed to understand was Kay. Abina felt tears sting her eyes. Whoever wrote this was drowning, and no one even noticed. The next day, Abina found Kwame sitting alone at the mango tree. She took a deep breath and walked over. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. He shrugged. "Suit yourself." For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Kwame broke the silence. "You ever feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough?" Abina froze. His words sounded like they came straight from the diary. She didn't know how to respond. Later that week, Abina overheard Amma crying in the bathroom again. This time, she decided not to walk away. "Amma, it's me," she said softly. "I'm not here to bother you. I just want to help." The door creaked open slightly, and Amma's tear-streaked face appeared. "You can't help. No one can." Her voice broke, and Abina's heart ached. Was Amma connected to the diary too? In the next diary entry, the writer described their only safe place, an old desk in the back corner of the library. It was where they wrote when the world felt too heavy. The next day, Abina went straight to the library after school. Sure enough, there was a desk pushed against the wall, covered in faint pencil marks and scratches. She ran her fingers over the surface, wondering how many of the diary's words had been born right there. Abina's curiosity got the better of her, and she asked to meet with the principal, under the pretense of a school survey. "Do you think the students here feel supported?" she asked. The principal smiled politely. "We do our best. Of course, teenagers have their struggles, but we try to create a safe environment." Abina didn't press further, but she left feeling unconvinced. Whoever wrote the diary clearly didn't feel safe. By now, Abina felt like she was chasing two different trails, one leading to Kwame, the other to Amma. The diary mentioned both soccer and a love for numbers. Amma was great at math, and Kwame was the soccer star. Could they both have written parts of the diary? Or was there something connecting them that she hadn't figured out yet? Abina found a folded piece of paper slipped into her locker. The handwriting was messy but familiar. "Stop digging. You don't know what you're getting into." Her hands trembled as she read the note. Was this a warning from the writer, or someone else who knew about the diary? The note left Abina feeling uneasy. She kept glancing over her shoulder all day, wondering who could have written it. Her instincts told her to stop. But how could she? Whoever wrote the diary needed help, even if they were too scared to ask for it. She shoved the note into her bag, determined not to let it scare her off. After school, Abina spotted Kwame walking home alone. She jogged to catch up with him. "Hey, can I ask you something?" she said. Kwame raised an eyebrow. Depends. Is this about that survey you've been doing? Abina froze. What do you mean? I've heard you've been asking a lot of questions. People talk, you know. His tone was calm, but his eyes were guarded. Abina hesitated. Was he trying to protect himself, or someone else? During a group project the next day, Amma snapped at a classmate over a small mistake. Everyone stared as she stormed out of the room. Abina followed her, finding her pacing in the hallway. Amma, are you okay? Amma glared at her. Why do you care? You don't even know me. Her words stung, but Abina stood her ground. Maybe I don't, but I want to. Amma's expression softened for a moment, but she turned away. Just leave me alone. That night, Abina read a new section of the diary. The writer described a day when they felt completely invisible, despite being surrounded by people. I smiled, I laughed, I even made a joke. No one noticed how much it hurt to pretend. Abina felt tears welling up. The writer wasn't just lonely, they were disappearing in plain sight. She clenched the diary tightly. She couldn't let their story end like this. The next morning, Abina caught Kwame and Amma arguing outside the library. Their voices were low but intense. Why can't you just let it go? Kwame hissed. Because it's not fair. Amma shot back. You don't get to decide. They stopped when they noticed Abina watching. Kwame glared at her before storming off, and Amma looked down, avoiding her gaze. Abina's mind raced. What were they fighting about? Back at home, Abina reread the diary for the 100th time. This time, she noticed something she'd missed before, the name Kwame scrawled faintly in the margin of one page. Her heart pounded. Could this be the confirmation she'd been searching for? But if Kwame was the writer, why was Amma so involved? And why had they argued so fiercely? The next day, whispers filled the hallways. Someone claimed they saw Kwame crying after practice. Abina's curiosity grew. She wanted to ask him about it, but how could she approach the subject without making it worse? Meanwhile, Amma seemed even more withdrawn, avoiding everyone's eyes during class. The tension between the two of them felt like a puzzle Abina couldn't quite solve. During lunch, Abina found Amma sitting alone under a tree. She sat down without asking. I know something's going on, Abina said. You don't have to tell me everything, but I want to help. Amma stared at her for a long moment before speaking. It's not my secret to tell. Her voice trembled, and Abina could tell she was holding back tears. But if you really care, don't give up. That afternoon, Abina crossed paths with Kwame in the library. He seemed distracted, flipping through a book without really reading it. Hey, she said. You okay? Kwame sighed. Why do people keep asking me that? Because you don't look okay, she replied softly. He paused, his jaw tightening. Sometimes I think it'd be easier if people didn't notice me at all. The words hit Abina like a bolt of lightning. They sounded exactly like something from the diary. Later that week, Abina was called to the principal's office. I've heard you've been asking a lot of personal questions, the principal said, her tone firm but not unkind. Is there something going on? Abina hesitated. How could she explain without revealing too much? I think someone in our class needs help. The principal frowned but didn't press further. Be careful, Abina. Some things are better left to the professionals. Abina found a folded letter tucked inside the diary. It was addressed to K, but this time, it was signed, Amma. Her heart raced as she read the words. Amma wrote about feeling abandoned, about how Kay didn't understand how much their friendship meant to her. The pieces started falling into place. Amma wasn't the diary's author, but she was deeply connected to them. Abina sat in her room, holding the letter in one hand and the diary in the other. Amma wasn't the writer, but she was clearly entangled in their story. The more Abina thought about it, the clearer it became. Kwame and Amma weren't just connected to the diary, they were connected to each other. But how? And why did their friendship seem so fractured? The next day, Abina approached Amma during recess. I found the letter, she said quietly, holding it out. Amma's eyes widened. Where did you get that? It was in the diary, Abina replied. I'm trying to help, Amma. But I can't if you keep shutting me out. Amma looked away, her shoulders slumping. It's complicated. Abina softened her voice. Then uncomplicate it. Please. Amma finally spoke, her words slow and careful. Kwame, he's been struggling for a long time. But he doesn't want anyone to know. He hates feeling weak. Did you write the diary? Abina asked. Amma shook her head. No, it's his. I only wrote the letter because I didn't know how else to reach him. The truth hit Abina hard. Kwame had been hiding in plain sight all along. Now that she knew the truth, Abina felt torn. She wanted to help Kwame, but she couldn't betray his trust by confronting him directly. Instead, she decided to approach Amma again. If we work together, maybe we can help him, she suggested. Amma looked uncertain. You think he'll forgive us if we meddle? It's not meddling, Abina said firmly. It's caring. Amma reluctantly agreed to help. They decided to start small, just being there for Kwame, showing him he wasn't alone. At lunch, they sat near him, keeping the conversation light. He didn't say much, but he didn't walk away either. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That evening, Abina read another diary entry. This one was darker than the rest, filled with self-doubt and frustration. I feel like a burden. Like everyone would be better off if I wasn't here. The words made her stomach twist. She realized how urgent it was to make sure Kwame knew someone cared. The school held a big soccer match that weekend. Abina and Amma showed up, cheering loudly for Kwame every time he touched the ball. At first, he seemed annoyed by their enthusiasm. But by the end of the game, he was smiling, just a little. Abina caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. He nodded back, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. After the game, they found Kwame sitting alone near the bleachers. Great game, Abina said, sitting down beside him. He shrugged. Thanks. Amma hesitated before speaking. You know, you're allowed to let people in sometimes. It doesn't make you weak. Kwame looked at her sharply, but he didn't argue. The next week, Kwame started joining them during lunch. He didn't talk much, but his presence felt like progress. Abina noticed how Amma softened around him, her usual tension easing. It was clear she cared deeply about him, even if she didn't always know how to show it. Little by little, the walls around Kwame seemed to crumble. One evening, Abina reached the last few pages of the diary. The entries were raw and vulnerable, describing Kwame's fear of disappointing everyone around him. I want to be strong. But sometimes, I just feel so tired. Abina closed the diary with a deep breath. She knew what she had to do. Abina and Amma cornered Kwame after school. We need to talk, Abina said firmly. Kwame frowned. About what? About how much you've been holding in, Amma said, her voice trembling. For a moment, Kwame looked like he might walk away. But then he sighed, dropping his bag. Fine. Talk. It started slow, but eventually, Kwame began to open up. He talked about the pressure of being the star player, the expectations at home, and the loneliness that came with pretending he had it all together. I didn't want anyone to know, he admitted. It's easier to just keep it inside. Amma's voice was soft. But it's killing you, Kwame. You don't have to do this alone. Kwame looked at them, his defenses crumbling. Why do you even care? Because we see you, Abina said simply. Not the soccer player. Not the tough guy. Just you. For the first time, Kwame let himself believe it. The next day, Abina handed the diary back to Kwame. This belongs to you. His hands shook as he took it. You read it? Every word, she admitted. And I'm glad I did. It helped me understand you better. Kwame nodded, tears in his eyes. Thanks for not giving up on me. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. Kwame smiled more, laughed more, and let people in. Amma became his biggest supporter, always encouraging him to be honest about his feelings. And Abina felt proud knowing she'd helped them reconnect. The diary had been a window into Kwame's soul, but now, he didn't need it to express himself. One afternoon, Kwame approached Abina with a notebook in his hand. I've started writing again, he said. But this time, it's not about hiding. It's about healing. Abina smiled. I'd love to read it someday. Maybe, Kwame said, a hint of a grin on his face. Through Kwame's journey, Abina learned something important. Everyone carries a story, even if they don't show it. She realized how much strength it took to be vulnerable, and how true friendships could bring light to the darkest corners. The diary wasn't just Kwame's, it was a reminder of how powerful connection could be. Kwame stood in front of the class, presenting a project with confidence Abina had never seen before. As he spoke, Abina and Amma exchanged a knowing look. They had seen him at his lowest, and now they were watching him rise. The diary might have started his story, but his courage was what wrote the rest. Abina smiled. This was only the beginning, for all of them. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more incredible African folktales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep these timeless tales alive. Plus, you'll never miss a new adventure or life lesson we share. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.